very valuable thing that nobody talks about. We often talk about how the baby boomers are retiring. We often talk about how we're outsourcing to overseas. But one thing that we don't think about is what happens in businesses when we get rid of the institutional knowledge and nobody passes it down. So this is an issue that I deal with in churches that I help and businesses that I help. But I've got a bigger issue that is not even from a client that I had. One of the clients, it's actually something that happened in my family. My grandfather passed away last year. Before he passed away, he had dementia. He had some other issues going on, but he had dementia. He was an A1 saver. He paid all his bills on time. He was great. But when he got dementia, he started letting bills slip. He called AT&T one day, but because he had dementia, he didn't always understand what was going on. They talked him out of his landline. He had this landline for 54 years. Very same phone number for a really long time. Well, it turns out AT&T has spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to make themselves more profitable. And in trying to figure out how to be more profitable, they have gotten rid of a lot of the institutional knowledge. And what I mean by institutional knowledge, people who understand how the company operated before it had all these mergers and acquisitions to become the AT&T we know it. If you remember, AT&T before it was AT&T was Singular Wireless, it was Bell South, it was Southeastern Bell, and all of these companies came together, they merged together, and they became the AT&T we know it as. Well, that means that there are certain systems in certain regions that there were people who understood how they worked. Interestingly enough, they gave the phone number away. My grandfather ended up getting a different phone number once my mom got involved. And the phone number, long story short, still rings to a disconnected number. We went for 6 months calling AT&T, trying to go to branches, and no one seemed to know how to get the phone number back. Now, nobody's claimed the phone number. But this is a classic issue of the departments being unable to communicate with each other. And so if there's no institutional knowledge about how one department functions across another, you'll always have problems and pitfalls, and it creates this tension within your business where it will never be efficient. And so I'm not telling you to keep everybody on staff forever. People have to retire, people leave town, people move on. But here's the thing that we have to remember when we start scaling our business, when we start acquiring other businesses, when we start trying to move into being a megacorp, you have to be careful to make sure that all of your teams communicate. I was talking to a friend who worked on Capitol Hill for over 30 years. And as a matter of fact, I talked to him and I talked to another guy this morning who worked on Capitol Hill in a different way. Both of them talk about all of these programs that the government has, but none of the programs communicate. That's what one of my friends was talking about, how none of the programs communicate. The other friend was talking about how none of the staffers from the states, because they're divided on party lines, communicate. And the goal is that both organizations are trying to serve the same people. And so when you start thinking about staffers in Congress, you start thinking about programs in Washington, you start thinking about mega corporations, but because we have our own little bubbles, we don't communicate within the organization. And so we end up messing up those who we're trying to help and serve best. And so one of the things that I learned when I go help businesses figure out what are we going to do next, how do we grow, how do we become what we're going to be, we've got to perfect the art of communication, and not just communicating through email, but having an understanding of how everybody functions. My job might be operations. I might be the COO, CEO, but I need to have an idea of how everything functions within the organization, because when something malfunctions, if no one in the business understands how everything works, and you don't have to be an expert, but you just have an overview of how everything works, when something malfunctions, you won't be able to fix it because you won't have a clue where to start. And so I see it clearly with AT&T. I see it clearly with our subsidized programming in the government. I see it clearly in Congress. We don't communicate because we think that in our own little bubble we can operate, and for a little while that's possible. But if we want to be excellent, if we want to set ourselves apart, if we want to be companies, businesses, organizations, churches, even civic groups that make great impact, we have to perfect the art of communicating, and not just communicating through words, but communicating through actions, so that we have an understanding of where we fit in the ecosystem. Anything that exists on its own will be powerless, but anything that understands how it fits in the whole has some great influence.